In the end, one detail is unarguable. There will always be those searching for treasure. Never forget, we are a country founded on legends and myths. We love them, especially legends of treasure. Looking for treasure isn't just part of being an American, it is America. This quote from Brad Meltzer's 2013 non-fiction book History Decoded, The 10 Greatest Conspiracies of All Time, a 2013 non-fiction book, couldn't be more apt for today's Bad Things video. Stay tuned for this one. Pirates, the Knights Templar, holy Christian relics, Aztecs, and even William Shakespeare fall into the realm of the Oak Island mystery. What is the Oak Island mystery? How did it start? What out there theories have been put forward by treasure hunters? And what does Bad Things think the Oak Island mystery is? The history of the Oak Island treasure dates back to 1795, when three young men, Anthony Vaughan, Daniel McGinnis, and John Smith, set off for a day trip to Oak Island. Much of the island was uninhabited, densely forested and untamed at the time, making it an excellent location for the three young men to hunt, explore, and have fun. After landing in the secluded Mahone Bay, the three set out into the oak woodlands in search of game to hunt. As they roamed the island, they came to an area that looked like it had been cleared at some point. The enormous trees had been replaced by secondary growth, and the location was overrun with weeds and shrubs. And the three men assumed it had once been a Native American village. Then they noticed a single massive oak tree rising above the smaller saplings in the middle of the area. They noticed that the bark of this tree had scars from an axe, marks that seemed like numbers or markings that could mean something. They also discovered that one of the tree's lower branches had been sawed off a few feet from the trunk and had a severely furrowed scar, as if a rope or chain had been attached to it. A circular indentation in the soil, about 10 feet in diameter, was almost precisely under the lopped-off limb. Vaughan blurted out, "Treasure, buried treasure. That's exactly what it is. Perhaps Captain Kidd hid his gold here." "See," he went on, "they used a block and tackle on the limb to hoist their treasure chests into the hole. That's exactly what it is. Hidden treasure." They thought they had discovered a hoard of riches and ran to their boat with the plan of going back to their homes, getting picks and shovels, and then returning to uncover the fortune they were sure was theirs for the digging. The tide had fallen during their exploration of the island, and as the three approached their boat, they made another discovery. An enormous rusty iron ring bolt in a seaweed-coated rock was exposed by the abnormally low tide, a ring bolt of outdated design and large enough to serve as a mooring to a good-sized ship. Could this be additional evidence of the pirate spoils to come? As they wandered around waiting for the tide to come in, the three made two even more exciting discoveries. One was a 1713 copper coin, while the other was an old-fashioned bosun's silver whistle. They had reached a point where they no longer had any doubt that there was treasure on Oak Island. A ship had been at Mahone Bay over 80 years ago, buried treasure under the lone tree, and all they had to do was return and pull it out. The three young men returned to their secret location the next day, armed with picks and shovels, and set to work. Within a few minutes, they excavated an ancient, well-defined circular hole with firm, undisturbed soil walls, with visible pick and shovel marks. Excited and confident that they were on the verge of riches, the three worked furiously, and Smith yelled joyously as his shovel hit oak planks 10 feet below the surface. But their faces turned from excitement to disappointment after exposing the huge boards and hauling the timbers from the dirt with their bare hands. Instead of the anticipated mound of gold and silver, they discovered nothing but the same loose soil as they had just dug out. Still, as Vaughan pointed out, the existence of the ancient oak timbers suggested that something was buried there, and they dove into their work again. They dug 5, 8, and 10 feet more, and their picks again struck wood. With hammering hearts, They yanked the planks apart once again, only to see barren soil below. By the time the three exhausted and sweaty young men reached a third oak bulkhead with nothing but soil under it at a depth of 30 feet, they gave up in despair. Not because they had lost trust that there was buried treasure, but because they had reached their physical limits. More men, blocks and tackles, winches and buckets would be needed to go deeper. They hated the idea of telling others about their find, but they were now convinced that the treasure was large enough to make many men wealthy. When they returned to the village and recounted their story, they found that the villagers had no inclination to join them in their treasure hunt. The villagers did everything in their power to dissuade the three men from going back, and told them terrifying stories about ghostly figures, mysterious unearthly flickering lights, and terrifying cries that had been heard and seen in the area surrounding the lone oak for decades. Not one person would agree to help the three in their hunt, and when they couldn't find any fellow treasure hunters, they abandoned their plan to reclaim the elusive treasure. More than 10 years passed, and the three men had almost forgotten about their treasure hunt until Dr. Linz from Truro arrived at Oak Island. Rumours of the trio's discovery had made their way to Truro, and Dr. Linz made his way to the island to speak with Smith, Vaughan, and McGuinness. They enthusiastically told him about their discovery and efforts 10 years previously, and then brought Dr. Linz to visit the location of their abandoned work. The doctor was nearly as eager and intrigued as the other three had been 10 years earlier. He was utterly convinced that an enormous wealth had been hidden under the oak tree, and hurried back to Truro to set up a business to extract the treasure. Colonel Robert Archibald, Captain David Archibald, and Sheriff Harris were among the many notable persons who purchased shares in the treasure hunting company. With the funding secured, all the excavation equipment bought, and a work gang employed, a camp was erected on the island, and the dirt started to fly. This effort may have been the first to professionally excavate the site, but it was by no means the last. Over 25 companies and individuals have sunk holes, bled, died, and cried trying to excavate what would become known as the Money Pit since McGuinness, Vaughan, and Smith broke ground on Oak Island. News of the treasure didn't only attract the get-rich-quick crowd. Stories of buried treasure piqued the interest of celebrities, actors, politicians, and the super-wealthy. Australian-American Errol Flynn was an actor who achieved worldwide fame during the golden age of Hollywood. He was known for his romantic swashbuckler roles, his reputation for womanizing, and his hedonistic lifestyle. Flynn is said to have invested in an Oak Island treasure dig with one of the many companies that have dug on the site over the last 200 years. He wasn't the only actor to invest in unsuccessful digs on Oak Island. Arguably one of the most famous actors of all time got roped into investing in a fruitless treasure hunt. John Wayne invested in the drilling equipment to be used on the island to help solve the mystery in another failed dig. William Vincent Astor, heir to the Astor family fortune after his father died on the Titanic, was a passive investor in digging for treasure on the island. At the time, Astor appeared at number 12 on the first list of America's wealthiest people, compiled by Forbes magazine. An American president even tried to get in on the action. Franklin D. Roosevelt started investigating the mystery in late 1909, sparked by stories told by his sailing, trading, and Oak Island financier grandfather, Warren Delano Jr. Roosevelt followed the mystery till his death in 1945. Throughout his political career, he kept an eye on the island's treasure recovery efforts. Although the president secretly wanted to visit Oak Island while in Halifax in 1939, fog and the growing war clouds in Europe stopped him from doing so. Why has no substantial treasure been found with hundreds, if not thousands, of holes, excavations, and earth-moving operations over the last 200-plus years? If one goes over the records of attempts, one word continuously pops up: water. Oak Island's security system is water, and as many hunters have realized, much to their dismay, that it is impossible to bail the ocean out of a hole. The Money Pit's designers created a trap where an airlock bursts when a particular depth down in the pit is reached. This enabled a flood tunnel system to provide a consistent water supply and fill the pit to tide level. When hearing that water entered the Money Pit, some people would respond, "But of course, since every hole in the earth would contain water at some level." However, the water in the pit is salt water, not groundwater, and numerous other holes had been excavated to deeper depths in the area of the Money Pit without hitting any water. When the early treasure hunters realized they were dealing with salt water, they went out to find out where it came from. This led them to Smith's Cove. The searchers spotted water escaping from the coastline at several points as the tide receded in Smith's Cove. As they dug to find out why, they discovered a well-engineered system of box drains with a constructed filter consisting of a layer of fibre similar to that found in the pit and thought to contain coconut fibre, eelgrass, and beach stones. This was followed by 5 box drains built of flat stones with more flat stones on top. They formed a fan and converged at a spot around the high water mark. The whole project was meant to protect the water supply from the flood tunnels to the pit from getting clogged. It was a simple but highly effective solution. Who would go to such lengths to bury a treasure in a way that has frustrated even the most modern engineers and excavation equipment? The theories on who built the Money Pit and possibly buried treasure on Oak Island range from outlandish to highly probable, depending on how strong your conspiracy game is. The sheer number of theories is staggering, so we will give you the best 3 out of the lot. Pirates. There is little doubt that pirates were acquainted with Nova Scotia beginning in the early 17th century and beyond. Beginning in 1612, Peter Easton, a lesser-known but maybe the most powerful and wealthy pirate of them all, operated from his stronghold in Newfoundland. Easton travelled across the Atlantic and to the West Indies to conduct his nefarious profession. Many pirate theories, however, choose the famed Captain William Kidd as the leading contender in the Oak Island mystery. Kidd spent many years pirating in the East Indies, as well as the Indian and China seas, before his imprisonment in Boston in 1699. He allegedly directed his ship north before returning to port in Boston on his way back to the West Indies, which led to his trial and execution in 1701. Kidd's stay in the north before his imprisonment gave him ample time to hide his ill-gotten gains in the Money Pit. There is also speculation that more than one party of pirates used Oak Island as a type of communal pirate bank. Many pirates based in Port Royal, Jamaica, including Sir Henry Morgan, Jean Lavoisier, Bartholomew Sharp, and others, may have used the protected Oak Island as a communal treasure dump beginning in 1625 and lasting until the 1700s. Of course, the difficulty with pirates was that they were renowned spenders rather than savers. Oak Island has always had an air engineering precision, or seems to be a highly ordered and controlled endeavor. Pirates were anything but. The looting of Panama. Captain Henry Morgan's capture, plunder, and burning of Panama City in 1671 was an act of pure piracy. Morgan and his men had spent 3 years successfully capturing neighboring communities, but were still outnumbered in the January assault on Panama. The pirates won the battle, and Morgan's men terrorized the city for weeks, carrying money and gold back to their conquered town of Chagres. When Chagres refused to pay a demanded ransom, Morgan ordered that it be destroyed. While his men were busy doing so, Morgan left port with most of the ill-gotten treasure, leaving his former troops behind. Morgan is said to have then taken all of his riches north, away from the southern pirates, before returning to Jamaica and becoming governor. Morgan possessed the vision, expertise, and followers to build such a sophisticated structure for his valuables. But why did he never go back to retrieve them? The Knights Templar. The Templars were one of Europe's wealthiest and most influential organizations. During the Crusades, some of the order were seen as proficient warriors, while other members were lauded for their economic competence and the creative financial systems they established. By the early 1300s, the Templars had become too powerful. King Philippe IV of France, who was severely indebted to the order, issued an order on Friday, October 13, 1307, to arrest important Templar officials. On November 22nd, the Pope, under pressure from Philippe, issued a decree ordering the arrest of all Templars and the seizure of their assets. According to legend, several Templars went to Scotland to seek refuge, taking with them an immense treasure, including magnificent holy relics such as the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. In his book, Holy Grail Across the Atlantic, Michael Bradley speculates that Scottish Earl Henry Sinclair travelled with what was left of the Knights Templar to Nova Scotia in 1398. Is there any evidence to support this theory? There may just be. After cleaning a small coin found on the island, treasure hunter and professional diver Tony Sampson saw what appeared to be a cross design on one side. This distinctive cross could be the symbol of the Knights Templar, who in the 13th century instituted one of the first international banking systems. A solid lead cross was also found along the shoreline of the island. Templar expert Jerry Glover examined the cross and estimated it might be from the 13th century. He further connects it to Templar symbols from a similar time frame. These and other out-of-place artifacts are hard to explain and make for an excellent theory, and only time will tell if it's true. There is one other theory that we haven't covered, and it is the most plausible. The Oak Island mystery is a scam, and has always been. Let's look at the facts. No theories, just the cold, hard facts. The origin story. There are numerous conflicting accounts on how the Money Pit site was found, making its history just as foggy as the sea that surrounds it. There are three beginnings. Story number 1. 3 boys, the original founders of the Money Pit, Daniel McGuinness, Anthony Vaughan and John Smith, were out fishing when they saw strange lights on the island and decided to investigate finding the depression and ultimately the Money Pit. Story number 2. In story number 2, Daniel McGuinness is a local farmer, lives on Oak Island and is not described as a boy, is looking for a new place to plant crops and notices the depression with 3 trees around it with a pulley and tree nails. Story number 3. Daniel McGuinness has pastured his cows on the island and is working on rounding them up. He notices red clover where he believes only white clover should grow. There is a depression in the ground, an oak tree in the middle of the red clover, and the tree has block and tackle attached to it. If this isn't confusing enough, there are also variations on the description of the oak tree. There is a single tree. There are 3 trees arranged as the points of a triangle. The tree has already been cut down, and only the stump remains. And predictably, there are also variations on what the block and tackle looked like. The branch has been sawed off and has markings that look like a block and tackle had been attached. There is a single branch with block and tackle still attached. The block and tackle are lying on the ground near the tree. The 3 trees have 3 branches that meet directly over the center of the pit, with the block and tackle attached. Then there are differing accounts of what was found when they started digging. Oak logs at 10 foot followed by strange pick and shovel-like markings at regular intervals. Oak planks at 10 foot and then every 10 feet after that. Oak planks at 10 foot and the random layers of timber, clay, coir, etc. every 10 feet thereafter. All of these stories were shared by treasure hunters who arrived after McGuinness, Vaughan and Smith had given up on finding their pirate treasure, and others had begun searching for the fortune. The money pit was discovered in 1795, but was not written about until the early 1850s. Nothing in the search history of the island has been adequately recorded. All the accounts came from those who were either emotionally or financially invested in finding the treasure. The money pit. As we've seen, there have been countless attempts to reclaim the treasure from the money pit. Every attempt failed when the treasure was close at hand. The crucial point to remember here is that there is no proof of anything valuable ever being recovered from the money pit. Any item that apparently has been recovered is lost and unaccounted for. Part of a gold chain, lost. A piece of parchment with weird symbols on it, lost. The 90-foot stone with an unbreakable cipher inscribed on it, lost. After several efforts to dig directly and indirectly for the treasure had failed, treasure hunters began exploring Smith's Cove for openings for the rumored flood tunnels in the 1860s. They claimed they discovered the finger drains. They also claimed to have discovered enormous quantities of coconut fibers used as filter media in the drains. This was strange, as there were no coconut trees on Oak Island. According to treasure hunters, the coconut fibers prove the finger drains exist. The finger drains prove a significant effort to prevent unauthorized recovery of the treasure. And the structure's complexity proves that an immense treasure is buried in the money pit. So, is coconut fiber the key? Coconut fibers disintegrate. Some specialists believe it takes 15 months for them to disintegrate completely. Even if the deterioration rate is 15 years, the math doesn't compute. Smith's Cove coconut fibers were discovered in the 1860s. The treasure is said to have been hidden before 1795. 1860 minus 1795 equals 65 years. As a result, even if the treasure was buried right before McGuinness, Vaughan and Smith found the money pit, there would be no coconut fiber in Smith's Cove in 1860. We can state with reasonable certainty that before 1850 there was no substantial layer of coconut fiber under the beach's surface at Smith's Cove. If there was coconut fiber found in Smith's Cove in the 1860s, it was used by treasure seekers just before others discovered it. The final nail in the coffin is what the coconut fiber was presumably there to protect in the first place: the flood tunnels. The Oak Island myth claims that a flood tunnel ran from the box drains in Smith's Cove to the money pit. This assertion is not based on first-hand observation, since neither treasure hunters nor anybody else has ever reported seeing it. It is wholly based on an assumption established in the 19th century as a consequence of observed events. Belief in the presence of a flood tunnel has never been supported by facts. There has never been a compelling reason to believe this theory, and extensive searches in the 19th and 20th centuries showed no trace of a flood tunnel. All efforts to block the alleged flood tunnel by excavating and using explosives have failed to stem the water flow into the money pit. As a result, there is no basis to suppose that a flood tunnel exists. Those who thought a flood tunnel reached the money pit in 1864 misinterpreted one of two lateral tunnels excavated earlier from an auxiliary shaft. Richard Joltz, an archaeologist who has studied the Oak Island mystery extensively, states, "What most likely happened on Oak Island was that once the diggers reached a certain depth, the pressure exerted by seawater flowing through the channels and fissures in the rock became too great for the earth remaining in the pit, so a blowout occurred and the pit was filled, as would any hole dug to such a depth in close proximity to a body of water." It must be remembered that the island rises a maximum of 30 feet above sea level, and the pit was dug to a depth of over 100 feet. Thus it extended roughly 70 feet below mean sea level, a depth at which the remaining soil would be subject to considerable pressure. It should be noted that no comprehensive scientific study of the island or the pit has ever been conducted. All of the current information has been generated by treasure hunters who had a strong interest in keeping the mythology alive, or by conspiracy theorists who want to connect Oak Island to anything from Grail mythology to Egyptians. A reasonable archaeological investigation of the pit is complicated since crucial data has been destroyed by earlier explorers, and there are no artifacts in existence that were gathered in a credible scientific way. Coconut fibers, stone channels, and oak timbers have all been discovered in ways that make scientific examination impossible. Just as removing a dinosaur bone, pot, or arrowhead from its natural setting makes it less valuable to a paleontologist or archaeologist, these objects are practically worthless in understanding what, if anything, the pit was used for. One thing is for sure. From companies offering shares to investors to reality shows on TV, the Money Pit has probably made more money to date than if an actual treasure was ever found. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.